Welcome back to another day of Block Game. Last time we spent a lot of time working on Big Doom Base, and today I would like to take a step back to work on a different project, which will see me return to my city. I've barely addressed the city in my videos so far, despite it being one of my favorite projects I've ever done, and I've got some work I want to put into it. So here's the agenda for today. First, I want to complete this street. There's a little corner that needs a building right behind me, and after that I have some thoughts and want to talk about generic builds for this city, as well as a couple other little things such as the name of this world. Should be a fun one, so enough talking, I want to build. And here we are, the final addition to the street. I think it's a bit different compared to the rest of the street it lives on, and what will be the rest of the city, but for the theme I'm going for at this point, that being a very old development of the city, I think it's pretty neat. I really didn't have much in mind going into its design other than maybe something restaurant-y, but I initially sketched down what was on my mind onto paper, and I think I came with an interesting product. Between the multiple roofs, the overall shape, and its color, I also really like the inclusion of the basement entrance, just a classic in city space efficiency. And I would like to do some interiors here, but I am really bad at those, and that fact alone is worth its own video, so later. Afterwards, unlike this build, I was taking a look at different references for building ideas and came across this sort of strange, rounded out building and figured it would be fun to build the essence of. I gotta work a bit more on the top roof, but otherwise, not as much to talk about here, but I just think it's a nice addition. It looks funky. Going down pretty much the rest of the street though, I figured it would be smart to include and improve on generic building. It's a strange thing to talk about, so let me get a bit into it and I'll talk about that concept more while I build. So I wanted to elaborate a little bit on what I mean when I talk about generics. See, an issue I had going into the city is me being stuck in the mindset that every build has to be highlight worthy, worth showing off kind of thing. While that's great for the quality of each build, it's not realistic to expect something like that in a real city, nor is it sustainable. This city is many months old now, and honestly, I've not done a ton to make it the big city dream. I have tried generics a couple times here, notably down the street, but I think I had the idea twisted and ended up with bad quality, boring, and a few sad buildings that will probably get straight up redone. I'm excited for what I have in mind for this new generation of generic buildings though, because as seen with this guy right here, I have proper size and scaling in mind, and I'm actually putting thought into the detail for these buildings. Yes, at the end of the day, they won't really be worth pointing out compared to other buildings in the area, but they fill out the city. Hopefully I'll get to it today, but I also have ideas to start a more New York style development in the city. The Havana stuff is so much fun, but it's a bit limiting. And I said at the beginning I wanted to do a mix of both, and I think I have found that balance for future buildings. New York stuff is cool because the city is already an amalgamation of architectural styles, something you can kind of see mirrored in what I've done so far, between the contrast of colorful builds to boring brick brown, or heavily shaped buildings next to rectangles. It's cool and makes sightseeing fun and interesting. I want to maintain that mixture, but with less constraint to what specific style I want to maintain. I also want to make sure I maintain a sort of specific skyline. Everything around here is short compared to what you would typically expect from a city. I'm trying to be very deliberate with how the skyline view from the front looks. I expect my work to get rather tall, with hopefully eventually some skyscraper stuff, and you'll especially see this start with the second batch of generics I have coming. Also, while I'm here building and yapping, I wanted to quickly mention the fact that my world has an official name now. I wanted to come up with something before I started this series, but I completely forgot, and a year went by and I realized, why am I still calling this world Survival Build World? It's such a silly problem to have, but anyways, I landed on Shrimp's Basin. It's simple and relevant to where I am building, which has everything centered around a large water source in between a bunch of mountains, which is reminiscent of a basin. And it's, you know, mine, Shrimp, that's me, and that's it. There's your origin story for naming my build world, with all the drama and hardships. Anyways, I'm going back to focus on the building, and we'll talk again in a minute. Alrighty, I think these turned out pretty nice. It's all simple in concept, take one build, change its color, how many floors it has, and boom, skadoosh, city fleshed out, just like that. In all seriousness though, this is the kind of idea I want to keep working with. The 3 buildings are all pretty large, not too complicated, but big enough to add the depth and detailing that makes it look pretty nice in my opinion. They all follow the same shape and general detailing with minor changes such as the trims on the roofs, but I'm very happy with how these guys look. They're also kind of a big deal because they actually follow the architecture that you would sort of expect from Havana, specifically with the balconies and the walkways with arches underneath. Pretty much your tourist stock photos you'll find on Google sort of thing. It also helps me a ton that these guys are pretty easy to put together, which is important for long-term development in the city. And I think that's about it for these guys. Very happy with how they look and their impact on the city. Next I want to get a second batch of generics in, so quick funny time lapse and I'll be right back. That's right, it's time to continue the city's expansion going back. You may have noticed there's a big contrast with these generics comparing them to the last 3. They all have unique designs and they are much more New York in style than anything else I've done. This weird big guy right behind me, which I kind of have to finish, sort of marks the transition between the 2 styles, and these 3 buildings are pretty much the benchmark going forward until I get to the next mysterious transition point. They're a lot bigger than pretty much everything done previously, which is a big deal for that skyline I mentioned earlier, as they barely peek out from the top of the perfect view. Once I get around to finishing the block they're on, they'll act as a base for city blocks going forward, since that is easier to develop with the land starting to open up rather than being within this valley. As for the actual buildings themselves, they are boring, bland, unremarkable, which is perfect. This guy went with the raw sandstone experience, which I think is pretty cool considering all the options for block sandstone gives you. With a shopfront style base and office building stories going to the top, it's simple, it looks nice, and is a good addition to the generic bit. In the middle, classic bricky apartment style building. Once again, simple and looks nice. Lastly, this funky guy right here. What's going to be important for my buildings going forward is that I maintain the mixture of Havana and New York, specifically how colorful everything is. I really like that all 3 of these buildings, while 2 are relatively colorless, are still all different colors. Being colorful and the consistency of base sandstone is what I want to keep for the majority of the city, and I think it's pretty cool. Anyways, this guy's green, short and simple. That's all it has to be. That's about it for these guys now. I think they look great and make me excited to move along with this part of my world. With everything I wanted to complete for this video done, I'd like to take a bit to do a little tour of what I've done so far within the city. I did feature it in my first video, but it was more of a glance, and I didn't really point out anything specific with any buildings here. And I think there's some interesting things to talk about. I'll try to keep it brief, but we'll start out where I started and move along the timeline, starting with these 3 builds. At this point in time, before anything had been done here, I had been inspired by a relatively recent trip to New York City, where I found myself really taking in the beauty of urban city architecture, being efficient with space, the expanse of it all, and all the styles and design that goes into different buildings. Combined with random pictures of Havana and its colorfulness in the back of my mind, I was heavily inspired to try building some cityscape buildings, which I really had never attempted previously. I mean, everyone dreams of building a huge Minecraft city, but it's a huge time commitment and is hard to pull off, and I was never really interested. But I tried it. I went onto my creative build world and built these guys heavily based on nice concept art I had found online. And honestly, I impressed myself. I think they're scaled nicely, well detailed, and make a nice centerpiece to the vision I had found based on these guys. From that point, I knew almost exactly how I wanted to develop a city around them, but of course I needed to actually do the develop the city thing first. So I built the first street I wanted to develop on and got to work with my next buildings. At this point I decided I did not want to rely on a creative world to tinker with designs like I almost always do. Unless I really struggled with one, and if I did, I'll let you know. I wanted to put a lot into practicing being able to do this kind of stuff properly in survival mode, and these modular buildings are perfect for that. That being said, the purple weirdos kinda suck. I like the staircase on the side, I guess, ignore the chest mess. Their shapes are awkward and they're a bit smaller than what I would like them to be. I probably want to go in and remove those signs, they just look weird and I don't know how Pinocchio face over here happened. But it is what I wanted, freehand building in survival, and they stay for the reminder of my mistakes. And honestly, they don't look the worst when you don't look at them too much in detail. Quickly moving on to my second attempt at freehand, which I'm much happier with how they turned out because I learned from my mistakes. First was this corner cafe, which I'm very pleased with its design, shape, and detailing, with the cloth awning being a very nice addition. You can see peeking are some roof details, which I would like to add a lot more of around the city. Then the pink apartment slash hotel style building, which is simple, but I think it's a bit funky with its weird rounded building thing up top, and an overall silly shape. And last, this building, which almost looks like a standalone house, something that would be very rare in a city, but this part of the city is supposed to be a very old development, probably what would be considered a historical part of the entire city, and maybe someone important lived there with the large window that has a nice view across the water. Next brings us down the street where a rare build not built by me resides. This guy was originally done by a friend of mine and was built right here. All I did was mark where I wanted it and made minor tweaks so it would blend with the rest of the city. Simply a nice addition to fill the city in. I then decided to work across the street where I built this guy right here. This one heavily references this build here, which I liked how it looked and figured it would translate well into my city, and I think it did. I put this gap between these two buildings here because I figured it would be interesting to have an alleyway of sorts go back, and at this point, my timeline is messed up because I was building a lot. So going down the alleyway, I have a spoiler wall up because I have something pretty cool coming and it's taking a while to get done. Anyways, I wanted this rounded inner building thing to happen and I decided to cap this space off with a nice hotel with some funk to its shape, while picking a really nice selection of colors. I think it looks pretty cool and was made to be just tall enough to peek behind the buildings in front of it. Going back across the street here, I decided it would be nice to complete this other block I had started. I already had these streets in mind, which meant I didn't give myself a lot of room to work with for this corner build, but I wanted a big open window market style thing. Looking back at it, it's a bit undetailed for my liking, as well as the building next to it, which the idea is to be a sort of open window food stand. And I think I will come back to these guys and give them a refresh, detail them out, give them a bit more height that they really could use. Next to these guys is a bit of a storyteller. Here we got a big box brown boring apartment building. The idea is that for whatever reason at some point something got demolished in favor of something new, being this boring box building. While being old enough for the people to not have much care about the historical value at this point in time or maintaining a theme in the buildings. There's one more case of this happening here which I'll get to in a bit, but it does its job very well I think. And around the corner is a simple connector between the two buildings which I just haven't gotten around to detailing. Next is what I might say is my favorite part of the city so far. The clock tower. This is one I ended up designing in creative because I knew it was probably the most important piece to this whole thing. You know, being a centerpiece, it looks like an important monument, it feels like an important monument. I'm very proud of its shape, its color, its placement, its size. It's taller than anything around it before this big guy. It's just also nice and was what told me that yeah, this city is a cool project I can be proud of, that I want to put time into because I am capable of doing so. Anyways, that being said, besides it is this patch of land which has been restarted a few times now. It's a small block, just about the same size as the one the clock tower stands on, which makes it very difficult to put a building in, so I think I might just put a small park or garden here, I really don't know. Before continuing back, I built these guys, small buildings with the intent of being small pieces on the side that don't draw too much attention. I like the stone wall and the design of these two buildings. I do think I have to come back around to this yellow weirdo though and give it a little more detailing. Going back towards the clock tower, next thing was this big building right here. This is sort of a second part to the small story the brown box was telling. Being a later development, this time taking over an entire block worth of buildings. I don't have an actual planned out story going on here, but I like the potential implications of a big, unfitting hotel being built at this point. The build is very unfinished, but I like the shape and simple repetitive design going up. I haven't decided how I want to do the first floor yet exactly, but as you can see, I'm thinking of some smaller shop fronts to make up for lost space that this hotel takes up, kind of thing. Beside the ugly hotel is a much nicer, older, colorful building with the intent of being a town hall of sorts. I had started its design with this one segment on creative while tinkering with something else and eventually abandoned it for whatever reason, where I eventually rediscovered and wondered why I stopped working on it. So I brought the segment here and really developed it, and I think it's coming along. This building is pretty new, as well as its line favoring buildings being built not too long before this video, and I think this building particularly is looking great so far. Its neighbors on the other hand, at the end of the day, these buildings look pretty nice. specifically this one right here, but this was my first attempt at generics, and honestly, I think I missed the mark. These 3 specifically aren't worth redoing. I think they're fine enough, but compared to their much younger brothers down the street, they're too small, too wonky, and I didn't give them enough room to be detailed. Continuing down the line, we got some problems. Bad, ugly, lazy. These guys are getting torn down and replaced. Not much reason to linger here, these are just no good buildings that straight up ruin the area. Across the street is a lot better, still simple and needs a bit of detailing, particularly on the roofing, but they get the idea of this part of the street a lot better. Last thing I want to do before I end my tour is give a bit of a quick overview of the future. Literally. Here you can see everything from a pretty sweet bird's eye perspective. In the direction I'm working towards, you can see there's a lot of space going back. Initially I thought I would expand onto, and only onto, this weird landmass that had a river generate around it. But if you are paying attention to the size of this plot here, you might notice that I won't really be able to fit much there. There is a lot of space to work with around this whole area though, and hopefully the plan is to start building up skyscrapers as I go back. Eventually it will, well, if it all goes well, reach the ocean here, which will be fun for shaking up the style, and maybe it will hit the ice biome over there too. All ambitious stuff though, but if the footprint of each building keeps growing as quickly as it is currently, I might end up filling it up very quickly. It's an endless project and a great relaxing project for me to be able to work on, so we'll see where this guy goes, and how long it goes for, because at the end of the day, I'm just winging it. I lied, there is no plan to this whole project, I'm just building what I feel. And that's going to do it for today's episode. I hope the tour was enjoyable and that my passion for this little place is noticeable. I'm also very happy to have how proud I am of this part of the world on record now, and I hope you'll consider following along as I develop it, mostly because I have some pretty neat stuff coming soon here, as well as the rest of the world. Thanks for watching, please consider leaving feedback, I need a nap, and I will see you later.